What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Chris Lehto, retired F-16 pilot turned UAP investigating YouTuber, and I'm very excited to bring this video to you today with Nick Pope. Nick Pope has been a UFO investigator for decades now. He was most notably known as the UFO Desk officer for the UK. So the UK MOD Ministry of Defense from 91 to 94. He ran the desk. So it was the public-facing entity, but he investigated UFOs, alien abductions, crop circles, and did many hundreds, maybe thousands of interviews with military personnel, trusted people in the government who said they saw these crazy craft or phenomena, had these experiences. He's still doing it, so very happy he took time out of his busy schedule. He's very active on Twitter at Nick Pope MOD, or his website has a lot of information, nickpope.net. He's written several books. He's on The Basement Office, appears on many other media and television shows. Talked with him, he was very generous with his time. We talked through many things. This was a Patreon only live stream. So basically, if you like to be a part, backstage access to the actual filming and actually participate in interviews like this with me and other guests, then consider Patreon. I reserve it for the higher levels of the patron, but I appreciate any level. You can join for as low as $1 a month. So thanks, as always, to my patrons. Love you guys. And YouTube advertising, those are the only two forms of income for the channel. So thanks for all your support. Enjoy the video. So welcome, Nick Pope. You're obviously a huge name in the UAP field. You're on the Basement Office, New York Post. You've written many books. You've been in this industry for, I don't know, 3 decades now going on. So thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be on.
I invited you on the show because I was investigating the Turkey UFO. And what I found is your name just kept coming up. You know, you'd actually been in Turkey. You talked with Roger Lear. From what I learned, you don't have specific insight into Turkey UFO itself, but you do have insight into the UK government, governments in general, and into UAP phenomenon. So very happy to have you on the show to really talk about what you think about the recent NDAA stuff. Okay, so we will get into that shortly. First thing I wanted to cover is just quickly is this 3-row UAP. So UFOs filmed from the flight deck over South China Sea. This is just a quick little addition at the beginning to get your take on. I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter. So what was your general consensus on this?
Well, I never get particularly excited over one individual piece of footage. I mean, even if you can explain and document its provenance, I think it's always a mistake to bet the farm on just a single thing. Frankly, I know what I don't know. When I was doing this job for the UK Ministry of Defence, when we got photos and videos, we just sent them to intelligence community imagery analysts, and they worked their magic. I mean, these things could be flares, they could be, fire lanterns, they could be aircraft lights. I don't even have a perspective on the distance from the camera, therefore the size of the objects. But flares seem like a good fit. And as ever, one can't look at a piece of footage like this in isolation. You have to figure out, as I say, its provenance, but also look at the area that it was taken in and correlate, cross-check with flight paths, with military exercise areas and such forth. And that most times will turn up the answer. And of course, most times the answer isn't aliens, however much that would be great fun.
Yeah. Has the answer for you ever been aliens? That's a good question.
The answer has never been, it's definitely aliens. The answer, I'll flip it around. The answer several times on the best of cases has been, I can't rule it out. But you could say that's almost a philosophical debate about proving negatives and such like. I mean, I think the way I characterize it is there's a lot of compelling evidence with some of these cases, but I have never seen anything that I would say it constitutes definitive, you can take it to the bank proof that we're dealing with extraterrestrials. Though, as I say, that would be the most interesting of the explanations to the UFO mystery. It would certainly be the most impactful from a societal perspective, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we'll talk later if you think the U.S. government, or any government, I guess, is holding that information. Yeah, just so I've seen it quite a bit. I thought it was kind of obvious to me. It looks like flares, I guess. You know, it looks just like flares at a far distance, but it's very weird. I can't see the planes, you know, but you could have small drones. I guess you could have missiles even in a terrain that are putting these out. So me, it just looks too much like flares to not be probably flares. So, okay, I just wanted to get that out because I have seen it being shared a lot. This is an interesting reports, okay? We'll talk to your reports a little bit, but from Gov UK, we're able to get UFO reports in the UK. So this is like I took one from, just looked at UFO report 2009. When you mentioned you were working in the UK, you know, you were a member, or you were running the UFO desk, I guess is what you refer to it.
Yes, that always leads to a little bit of difficulty because the actual title of my job at the time was that I was one of the desk officers in a division called Secretariat Air Staff. Of course, that's going to be meaningless to most people. So generically, the MOD itself and the media tend to use phrases like the UFO Desk, the UFO Project, the UFO Program, even though we didn't formally call it that, but as a sort of does what it says on the tin. And what you put up on the screen there were summaries after my time on that program, I should say. My time there was 91 through to 94, but particularly post 2000 and post 2005, when it came in fully into force, the Freedom of Information Act obviously played a huge part in everything, and the Ministry of Defense had to produce these summaries of annual activity. So this is not the raw data, but this is somebody where I used to work entering onto a database the basic details, the date and time of an incident, brief description, the location, you know, all the basic what's, whys, and whens.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I was wondering, you know, is this what you, I guess, got? I was curious if you got into more detail, because this just seems like, you know, a little note. Somebody answers the phone, they write down a very large ball, looked like a fireball. The object was small but rather far away, you know, and then it is at the end. I imagine not.
No, I mean, this, as I say, these are summaries that have been databased. The raw data can come in almost any format. Sometimes it literally comes in. We had again, colloquially called the UFO hotline. So sometimes people would phone up and you would interview them over the phone, record all the details, actually on a standard form that was modeled on the old USAF Project Blue Book forms to record the details. Sometimes we would get letters. Sometimes if it came via a third party, people often report, say, to military bases or airports. Sometimes you get a military signal. Again, I was doing this in the early 90s, so we had a signal machine in our registry. And so one of the clerks would bring through a raft of signals that had come off the machine, and it would literally be headed UFO sighting, and you'd take it from there. And the amount of investigation you could do depended on what you got. I mean, often you would sometimes receive people reporting something months after the event where they weren't even sure of the exact date. In cases like that, you can do very little. Or in cases where somebody had seen, you know, white, green, and red lights near a major airport, again, you didn't tend to spend a lot of time on it. But where we had cases from police officers, pilots, military personnel, where we had corroborative data in terms of radar, for example, or photos and videos, then we could do a little bit more.
You basically took all that data and it looks like it became public. So when I was referencing the Turkey UFO, I found this archive here. Unidentified aerial phenomena in the UK air defense region executive summary, scientific and technical memorandum. So from what I understand, you had a part in producing the information for this. I mean, it came out in 2000. Obviously, you left before that. But what was your relation to this document?
This is something colloquially known as Project Condone. I mean, well, I say colloquially, that code word did come off the randomly generated code word machine at the MOD, which is why we end up calling things bizarre names. So, for example, our contribution to the Persian Gulf War was called Operation Granby. The Falklands War was called Operation Corporate. So for some reason, they tell me it was random. I do have a couple of suspicions, but Condone came off the code word generator. And I was involved in 1993. I sat down with my opposite number in the MOD's defense intelligence staff, and we said, look, we've got a problem here. The problem is that we investigate on a case-by-case basis, but nobody takes a step back and looks at this holistically. Let's do, for want of a better phrase, a proper intelligence assessment, not of any individual sighting, but of the phenomenon as a whole. And so it was very, very difficult for all sorts of political and resource reasons. And bear in mind, the MOD for years had downplayed all this subject. And we'd bent over backwards to tell people that we only really glanced at these reports to see if there was evidence of a threat. And we didn't really do much with them. And here we were plotting a full intelligence assessment at, as you can see, a fairly high level of classification. I mean, I think that was secret UK eyes only.
Yes. Yeah, secret.
So it got delayed, and as you say, I had been posted to another division before this was produced, so I played no part in the writing of this. But I set it up, and one thing that people can see instantly is that we use the phrase UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Yes. And we didn't invent the term. Interestingly, it goes back decades. People don't realize. But what we did do is we co-opted it for our classified policy discussions. And we said, look, we are not going to be able to convince defense ministers to fund intelligence assessments on UFOs. But if we reframe the issue and bring it to them as a safety of flight problem and a national security problem, we might get their buy-in. And that's exactly what we did. So we did these briefings where we talked about UAP, and that's the terminology that we used in that report. And you can see not only from that, but from some of the material in it, you can see quite clearly the language mirrors some of the AATIP language. And for example, the technological derivatives that we hoped might come from a fuller understanding of what we were dealing with. I mean, it's almost, if you look at Harry Reid's June 24th, 2009 letter to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, some of the wording is almost exactly the same as in Project Condone's executive summary, where it talks about signature reduction and RF weaponry and such like. So it's all in there. And just to put the icing on the cake, in, I think, January, and this was in a private capacity after I'd taken early retirement from the MOD, but in June 2011, I attended a closed briefing in DC where a former CIA director was there, a former White House chief of staff was there, and I briefed them on all of this. And one of the things that they were most interested in was the use of the phrase UAP as a way of jettisoning the pop culture baggage and reframing this as a defense and national security issue. And clearly, that briefing, where I said what we'd done and why, resulted in what you subsequently saw, what Hillary Clinton talked about in the phrase UAP, what John Podesta talked about, what AATIP and AWSAAP later used. I'm not trying to claim credit for anything they did, but I'm saying that they clearly adopted our terminology for exactly the same reasons. And indeed, I noted, I guess, that a US Navy spokesperson did say in one of the stories, I think it was to Stephen Greenstreet at the Post, UAP is a phrase we acquired from the British government.
And then where exactly did you get it? Where did where did the UK government get it from?
Oh, it had been kicking around in the UFO community for decades. So I think the irony is, even though we co-opted it for political reasons, it had been used before in the US, in the civilian UFO community, probably, I don't know, dating back to like maybe at least the 60s, if not before.
Do you think it worked going to UAP? Do you think it removed some of the stigma? Did it do anything?
100%. If you look at the language being used now, can you imagine people like Marco Rubio, Kirsten Gillibrand saying, I want to have a conversation with the American people about UFOs? Because I can't. But what I can imagine is what is happening. They're saying, look, the US Navy has some videos. Pilots and radar operators are seeing and tracking these things. Unidentified aerial phenomena are in our airspace. Is it Russia? Is it China? Is it something else? We need to find out. And everyone's like, yeah, sure, I get that. But so that's your way in. That's your way in to a serious conversation about it.
It's funny, right? You say UFO, people just will not listen. Yeah. But UAPs now you can actually have a serious discussion because we're talking about, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yes. Phenomena. Funny. So it's a thing. Yeah. It sounds sciencey.
Yes, it's a phenomena, and it's aerial. It could have been unidentified flying. Well, flying has to be an object, right? So I guess aerial just kind of removes it.
Yeah, I think phenomenon or phenomena, the plural, I guess, is better than objects because some things that are reported as UFOs turn out to be phenomena. So, for example, the final report of Project Condone gets into the theory that exotic atmospheric plasmas might explain some of the sightings. And by literal dictionary definition, a plasma is not a solid. So it's not an object. So yeah, UAP is better on almost every level, I think.
Yeah, I didn't, initially I thought it was kind of ridiculous that they changed the name, but I agree with you. I think humans are kind of ridiculous. And you mentioned kind of that plasma. I was surprised, really. The report was really in-depth. I was very surprised how in-depth it was, going through all of these kind of, sprites, linked vortex rings, ionospheric plasma, the optical mirages, charged dust aerosols, projected shapes and shadows. Very, very interesting. Do you know what all these things are? What is a linked vortex ring? Do you remember what that is? Or
I don't, but I know that people like the Battelle Institute were doing some research into kind of, it's almost like vortex guns. Like I think it comes up sometimes in non-lethal weaponry and things like that. But I can't remember the details of it now. But a lot of people still don't really have a definitive understanding of what's going on, particularly in the upper parts of our atmosphere with all sorts of plasmas and other phenomena which are almost halfway between lightning strikes and something a little bit more exotic. But again, I'm afraid I know what I don't know. I pass all this to the specialists. And you know, it's a good study, but there were some problems too. And the problem, you'll probably be familiar with this yourself. Very often when you get to the world of high classification, it puts limits on the consultation that you can do. So the lead author on this did not go out. I mean, did a literature search for some of this, but didn't really sit down and have too many conversations, for example, with atmospheric physicists or meteorologists. So, and where those conversations did take place, he had to dress this up as something else. I mean, you obviously don't go into, particularly with civilians, a situation where you say, hi, I'm from the Defense Intelligence Staff. We're doing a highly classified study on UFOs, and we want to understand what else people might be seeing. No, they kind of went in and said, we're looking at things, we're looking at pilots and maybe air safety issues. I know there are a lot of things up there. We're looking to get a better handle on some of that. I mean, but the point is, the moment you start blurring it, you kind of get a little off target.
Yes. Stay on target.
Absolutely. I couldn't resist that. Sorry.
I was interested too here where they have, you know, number one and the last one, you know, is UAP effects on humans, electronic equipment and objects, and then overview of magnetic field effects on humans. You know, it's interesting. I was interested to see that as well. Do you remember a lot of research, or what's your take on how the governments feel about this effect on humans or UAP effects that we're seeing?
Well, it's long been, it's long been known that there are a handful of extraordinary UFO cases where there are physiological effects on the witnesses. A very obvious one, actually two, they happen pretty much back to back, which is interesting. The Rendlesham Forest incident from December 1980 and the Cache Landrum incident, again, from December 1980. And in parallel with that, it has also been well documented, and it even segues into science fiction because you see it in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's known that on occasion there have been effects, for example, to car engines. Car engines have cut out, for example, after very close encounters. And people have speculated, is this the deliberate result of, or an unintended consequence of a sort of electromagnetic field of some sort? It comes up. So it comes up in these close encounter cases. And we felt that in a proper intelligence assessment of the phenomenon, you could not just pick and choose. You had to look at everything, and then if you throw some things out, fine. And there's no getting away from the fact that these things were reported. So tied to that is the idea that particularly when it comes to maybe the idea that some UFOs might be attributable to hallucinations, it poses the question, is there something about individual witnesses that makes them predisposed to this? Or if there is a genuine physical external stimulus, causes them to interpret this and respond in different ways. So simply put, investigate the sighting, investigate the witness. And it's fascinating to see. I mentioned parallels with AATIP. If you look at the list of 38 defense intelligence research documents that came out of the AWSAAP/AATIP program, one of the titles, and maybe two of the titles, magnetic field effects on humans, it's virtually word for word. So this has long been known. We in the MOD didn't claim to have any answers, but we thought it was a question worth asking. And clearly the people doing AATIP and AWSAAP thought so too.
Having run your own ATIP-like program, what is your take on ATIP, AWSAAP, Lekatsky? What is your take on the whole government's investigation into this phenomenon?
Well, I think I should say at the outset that although there are some parallels between the work I was doing and ATIP, I think the bigger parallel with the work I was doing was probably with Blue Book, because we were a public-facing program. I mean, although some of our work was classified, our existence was well known. Like Project Blue Book, you could literally pick up the phone. Our phone number was at every military base, every airport, every police station in the country, because those are the sorts of places people would report to. And as I mentioned earlier, we even used pretty much exactly the same template for recording the information as Blue Book used. So there were some differences and some parallels. But I think, what do I make of ATIP and AWSAAP? Well, it's complicated. And I think the latest book, co-authored by James Lekatsky, Colin Kelleher, and George Knapp, in one sense, it's a very important book, and I think it shines a new light on some things that were going on, particularly in relation to Skinwalker Ranch. But it also throws up all sorts of new questions. Like, where was the center of gravity in the US, in the official US government side of this? Was it with AWSAAP or was it with ATIP? And what exactly is the interrelationship between the two? Because to this day, if you talk to the DoD public affairs folks, they'll tell you their official line, though their line has been wrong before and they flip-flopped on it, but their current line is that the only product from ATIP was a contract called AWSAAP, and the only output of that contract were the 38 studies. Well, the Lekatsky, Kelleher, Knapp book obviously begs to differ and says there was a whole lot more. I think one of the obvious questions is, with Robert Bigelow intimately involved in this, having run his National Institute for Discovery Science, then having stood up his new Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies group just before the AWSAAP contract solicitation went out, there are questions about at what point, how much of this was government work and how much of this was Robert Bigelow's passion project. Well, the person who had to keep that contract on time and on target was the contracting officer's representative, the COR. Problem is, the COR was Lekatsky. So
he was the core.
So yeah,
on the contract. Yeah.
So there are questions about what part of this is what DIA really wanted and thought they were getting, and how much of this is passion projects from Robert Bigelow, from Lekatsky himself, who, of course, right at the outset confesses that he had an experience at Skinwalker and saw a sort of, weird shape in the room, and no one else saw it. So yes, there's fascinating stuff there, but my goodness, there are more questions than answers.
Yeah, it reminds me, I get this a lot when I start investigating. People say to stay away from the woo. They're like, stay away from the woo. But honestly, it all kind of seems like woo to me, because I didn't believe anything, any UAPs, didn't even think about UFOs until really this past year, last December, when I saw David Fravor, his interview with Lex Fridman. Before that, I never thought about it at all. So, how do you discern where is the woo and where is not woo, I guess,
Well, it is difficult because I'm not a scientist. So frankly, I wouldn't know. Where is the line? It's difficult. Where is the line between advanced theoretical physics and woo? I've mentioned a couple of times those 38 dirts, and they're listed in the January 9th, 2018 letter from the DIA to Congress. And when you look at the titles of those, this is the DIA saying to Congress, this is what we did under AATIP/ORSAP. And there it is: anti-gravity, invisibility, warp drive, wormholes. Well, you know, how do I know? I don't know whether that's woo or whether it's the theoretical physics that even most physicists haven't yet got their head around. And people, of course, always say, it's one of my pet hates, this is contrary to the laws of physics. And what I think they mean by such statements are, this is contrary to the laws of physics as they are currently understood and accepted by the mainstream of the physics community. But there will always be people pushing the boundaries. Heck, there was a guy called Einstein who did just that. And he would have probably been thought of as a little bit woo with some of his theories. And what do we read literally in the last week? Some of his theories are still, you know, being experimentally validated. So I don't know. But these sorts of things, they're in there. DIA was getting this and doing it, and now Congress is being briefed on it. But I don't know if anti-gravity is or is not a thing. But what I do know is that some theoretical physicists say it is a thing. So how a humble desk officer like myself answers that question, the simple answer is I shrug my shoulders and say, sorry, boss, no idea.
And while you were working there, do you think you were, this is from Lionel, so one of my patrons, thanks for being here, man. He says, while working for the UK government, did you feel that sufficient resources were put in place to actually make some progress? Do you think you had the resources?
Well, I think there's an old joke that if you ever find a manager who says he has enough resources, you know, he's not doing his job properly. No, I think you could always have had more. But the point was, and this is where I think people have recently, I think, not least the DOD itself, tried to throw a little bit of shade on Lou Elizondo by saying, oh, this was a small effort, it wasn't really properly funded. You don't need funds. What you need is access to resources and capabilities. And of course, the MOD and in the US, the DOD already has all the resources and capabilities that are needed to run a proper UFO program. Access to satellite imagery, MASINT data, access to data from the Ballistic Missile Early Warning Center, you know, the space tracking radars, the conventional air defense radars. All of that's already there. All you need is time on that. It's like SETI with astronomy. They don't need, SETI didn't need to build new telescopes. They needed telescope time on existing radio telescopes. So to answer the question, yeah, of course I would have liked more resources, but as long as I had, which I did, the ability to tap into what I needed, literally, to give specifics, you know, pick up the phone and say, hey, we got a fascinating UFO report, 0400 hours yesterday. Here's the latitude and longitude. Please check the radar. As long as I had that, I was reasonably happy.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had the access you were asking for. You know, you weren't running up against brick walls wherever you went to try and investigate these cases.
No, the brick wall that I did run up against, though, was an attitudinal one. A sort of, it can't be so it isn't, from more senior managers who felt that really this wasn't an appropriate use of defense resources in the first place. And that battle, I wasn't unique in getting caught up in that. That battle had been going on since the 50s in the MOD.
when I was researching this, I'm sure because it'll come up, is I was told that this is a hoax picture. Do you know that from the Belgian wave?
Yes. I mean,
Yes.
it's a very famous photo.
Yeah.
I know that some years ago, somebody came forward and said, yeah, I hoaxed it. And that kind of got just accepted as, oh, some guy said he hoaxed it, so therefore it's explained. I did not look into these claims. I didn't have time. I was caught up in other things. The case was by that time some degree, in the past. But my question is always, my point is always, let's not accept somebody putting their hand up and saying, I did that, I hoaxed it, I faked it. Let's not see that as case closed. Let's treat that in exactly the same way as you would treat the original claim. Let's investigate the claim, see if the person can bring forward any evidence. Here's the camera, here are my original negatives, here's how I did it, here under control conditions is me doing it again. And I don't know to what extent any of that was done, either in the UFO community by skeptics or believers or agnostics. And I don't know whether it was done by anyone outside of the UFO community who didn't maybe have a dog in that particular hunt. So dog in the race anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, I've heard the stories. I don't know. What I do know is this, and I mentioned MASINT a while ago, and for any non-technical specialists kind of watching, measurement and signature intelligence. So the idea that across a range of equipment that the government has, everything from optical, electro-optical, acoustics, radars, the government can take stuff like this. The military intelligence community, and the UK is very good at this, by the way, as is the US, and can often, if something is a hoax, very quickly say, oh, you know what? Yeah, that was just done using this computer program. And these days with Photoshop and other things, sometimes it's even easier to spot a fake because there are digital fingerprints that people leave. In the old days, when people faked a UFO photo, 9 times out of 10, it fell into one of, I think, 3 categories. It was either literally someone had thrown something into the air and photographed it, or someone had suspended it with a piece of twine or fishing line, something like that, or somebody had done a double exposure.
What's a double exposure? I'm sorry.
It's just a photographic technique of it's kind of like a reflection effect. But nowadays, of course, with computers, you can do so much more. And I've seen some amazing fakes, but I also know that imagery analysis resources and capabilities, MASINT experts within government can take a look at this sort of thing, and obviously access to original cameras helps, and or if not access, at least knowing the make and model. I know that was a very long answer to a short question. Yes, I've seen the picture. I've seen the claim that it was hoaxed. I don't know the truth behind those claims.
Well, it's interesting because I get this a lot too, like in dealing with the debunkers. They'll pick one aspect of a case, one little detail, and they show that's not true, and so they say throw out everything. Throw the baby with the bathwater. Because this. Yeah. So the Belgium, Lionel brings up. So he's from Central Europe. He says the photo's been claimed as fabricated, but there's also radar data, including hundreds of witnesses, cops, and pilots, etc. The Belgian wave, again, I'm learning about all these cases new, but that seems like a very compelling case, or at least mass sightings as well.
It is a good case, and I think the point just raised there is a good one, and it's a point. If you look at the ODNI's June 25th preliminary assessment of UFOs, one of the key takeaways in there was that a lot of these UAP sightings are detected across multiple sensors. So it is exactly that point. It's visual sightings from pilots like David Fravor, but corroborated by military radar, corroborated by FLIR footage. Former DNI John Ratcliffe raised the issue of satellite data in an interview around about a year ago now. And yeah, it's in there. I can't remember the page number. Maybe it's 3 or 5, something like that. But it says detected across multiple platforms, electro-optical, weapon seeker, and such forth.
Yeah, there was 80 reports here. Of these 144 reports, 80 were with multiple sensors. Yeah, like you mentioned, I completely agree. You know, that one picture of those, you know, I showed at the very beginning, the one video at the beginning of the 3-row UAPs, you know, even if that was, say it was, you know, a UAP, like we couldn't identify it, or I didn't at least think it was flares. It's still not enough. Like you mentioned, it's just one single source.
Sure. I mean, if a skeptic's point is some UFOs are misidentifications and some cases are hoaxes, my answer is absolutely. Tell me something I don't know. Those are not the cases I'm interested in. Those are the cases I'm interested in investigating, and I'm interested in debunking them and getting them off the table myself, so we can concentrate on what you might call the core phenomenon and say, what is the core phenomenon?
Yeah, I think this is really powerful here. There's 18 incidents described in 21 reports where they had unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. You know, do you remember, you know, I guess anecdotally, did you come across a lot of cases where you had multiple data, multiple sources, and you saw this unexplainable kind of maneuvers? Do you remember?
Yes. I mean, I'm not sure it was multiple back when I was doing this in the 90s. Often the best you could hope for was a military pilot telling you this happened, and then you have an uncorrelated radar target that corroborates the visual account of it. But yeah, we came across that. We certainly came across. I've interviewed numerous pilots, both commercial airline pilots and military pilots, rotary wing, fixed wing, you know, fast jet transport, etc., right across the range, who have said very often, I was looking at an object and it flashed past at incredible speed. You know, I've had fast jet pilots talk about being casually overtaken by these things. I've had fast jet pilots talking about, you know, trying to close for a better look, and almost this has been described a little bit like Belgium in terms of an aerial game of cat and mouse taking place, almost as if this is toying with us. And one couple of things that come out, and I always look for the patterns, but a couple of things that come out a lot with witnesses on the ground, something that comes up often in many of the compelling reports is a very low frequency humming sound, which some people have said might obviously be indicative of a particular type of engine, or it might be something to do, we discussed electromagnetic fields earlier, maybe some sort of exotic propulsion system or energy source, power source. I don't know, but that is a common thread. And with the pilot sightings, and actually with some of the ground sightings too, something very common is somebody will say, well, yeah, I was tracking this thing, closing for a better look, and then suddenly it just accelerated away, either to the horizon, beyond the horizon, out of sight, in almost literally, an instant. One of Lou Elizondo's 5 observables, I guess, and certainly, and interestingly, when you're looking at these reports from witnesses on the ground, one of the things that is reported, or rather is not reported, which is interesting in and of itself, is I can't recall in any of my case files one of these incidents where someone said, and there was a sonic boom.
Yes. Not one. You don't know one.
Offhand, I can't recall anyone in any of my MOD case files, or even in any of my predecessors, where somebody has reported to us at the MOD and said, I saw this UFO, very slow, then accelerated quickly, and wow, the sonic boom rattled the nearby windows. I cannot recall a single case where that was reported. Yeah. So the absence of a sonic boom is important in and of itself, I think, because absolutely from the accelerations described, often from military witnesses. I mean, I have literally sat down with people at fast jet bases who have said, this is my job. I see fast jets every day. And when I tell you orders of magnitude above and beyond that in terms of speed and acceleration and change of direction, that is what I mean. High Mach speeds and yet no sonic boom.
No sound. And well, I hear you mentioned the low humming noise, but it seems like more often than not, it's totally silent. Maybe they're just, further away.
Well, yeah, I think distance is a factor. Meteorological conditions, particularly wind direction, is a factor. I never get too, I think that particularly with a lot of people describing this as a very low humming sound, quite quiet. One person, a military witness who I interviewed who got very close to one of these things at a Royal Air Force base, said that he not only heard this sound but felt it. And he said it was deeply unpleasant. One of these very low frequency sounds that he could feel reverberating through his body. And he likened it. He said, if you've ever been to a rock concert, you've gotten too close to the speaker and you can feel it as well as hear it. He said, it's like that.
Wow, interesting. And was that for, if you can remember, was it an orb or I don't know, what did he see?
This was a large triangular shaped craft. And I mean sort of flat triangle, not pyramid triangle.
Excellent. And when you hear that, Nick, what do you think? Like when you hear these stories, I interview people, what is your thought? Do you not believe them? Do you believe them? What's your general consensus?
Oh, I believe them, particularly when they're coming from military witnesses on duty, reporting this to us at the MOD, and setting in motion quite a trail of events as the investigation unfolds. I mean, there would be career consequences if these people, and they're not just, it's at a range of ranks as well. I mean, maybe you could understand, I don't want to be too rank conscious about this, but maybe you could understand some bored soldier on guard duty, maybe pulling a prank on some of his fellow soldiers, and the whole thing kind of getting a little out of hand. But when you have Air Force officers making reports, as standalones, but particularly when it then turns out you have corroborative evidence in terms of radar. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I believe them. And I think it takes you to a very interesting position with not much middle ground, because all the usual things that you can look at and say, we know. I mean, certainly I know personally from my MOD work, but Blue Book, my predecessors, other countries who've run programs like this, all the usual suspects: aircraft lights, weather balloons, meteors, satellites, bright stars and planets, etc., etc. With these sorts of reports, the other sorts, there's not much middle ground. So you're either dealing, frankly, let's, cut to the chase. It's either secret prototype aerospace technology, terrestrial, our own kit, or adversarial technology engaged in espionage of some sort, or it's extraterrestrial, for want of a better term. Or if you buy into some of the other exotic theories out there, interdimensional, time travel, whatever. But as I say, there's not much middle ground when you get those sorts of reports.
We'll have to come back to that. That's a great thought, because it is. I've hit that as well, and that's kind of related to the question on stay away from the woo, right? Which is, it's kind of a 0 or 1.
Except, as I say, it goes back to this thing. Who, particularly, most of the people who say that are probably not physicists. If somebody said to Michio Kaku and some other theoretical physicists a generation ago, stay away from the woo, they would never have built the Large Hadron Collider, which, amongst other things, looks for exotic particles the world has never before seen, and looks for things like dark matter, dark energy, hidden dimensions, the existence of which are needed if string theory equations are to hang together. And yet, if you'd said stay away from the woo, you would never have even looked for that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Some of which, like the Higgs boson, has been found. Some of which the jury is still out on.
Yeah, it's funny what they've decided. It's almost like just because that UFO term is just so toxic, they just won't even look at it.
Well, I think this is what Professor Avi Loeb at Harvard has said with the Galileo project. Not trying to throw shade on it, but isn't it ironic that we do spend billions building something like the Large Hadron Collider, looking for these exotic things that may not exist, and yet we struggle to put a few million into UFO research when, let's face it, discovering the existence even of extraterrestrial life, but particularly civilizations, but ratcheted up a step, the possibility that we're being interacted with by any of this, you would struggle to imagine a more impactful discovery in all of human history. And yet, as I say, we spend billions on the Large Hadron Collider and not a lot on UFO research.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not against spending money on Large Hadron.
No, nor me.
Yeah. Hundreds of billions on, or how much money do we spend on nuclear weapons research, or advanced weapons research?
I support the, the independent, for the UK, for, having a strategic independent nuclear deterrent, but come on, once you can destroy another country's cities once over, let alone maybe 3 times for a little bit of built-in redundancy and whatever, but 20, 50, 100, come on,
Yeah. Yeah, it just gets ridiculous. I wanted to ask you though, you mentioned, because you've talked to many of these operators, military operators in the past. And it seems like, we don't hear many talking out. I think one reason people even go to my channel is there's just no other pilots talking about this really. Did you notice, did any of their careers, were they impacted? Any of those people you interviewed, were their careers ever hurt by speaking out?
The ones who, well, it's an interesting question. A lot of them didn't speak out. So, for example, one time I was let me answer the question first.
Yeah.
Sorry before I lose my thread. No, I don't think so. The most it resulted in was some jokes in the officers' mess, that sort of thing. I don't think there was anyone I can recall of who was literally grounded, say, as a result of making a report, or reprimanded, or felt that they didn't get a promotion that they otherwise would have gotten. However, I'll turn it around and say I spoke to an awful lot of pilots, civil and military, who did not make an official report because they were worried that those things might happen. And I mean, just to give one example, I once went to a totally unrelated MOD training course. I don't know what it was. It could have been financial awareness. It could have been leadership training. I can't even remember. But I do remember very vividly in the morning coffee break talking to a middle-ranking Air Force officer. We got talking about our respective jobs, and he was very interested to hear what I did. And he took me aside and told me in huge detail about a really compelling case that he personally witnessed. And I said, look, I shouldn't do this. I said, but you know, before I come in tomorrow, I'll swing by my office, and if you give me the date, I'll pull out the case file for you as a nice little blast from the past. And he looked a little bit embarrassed and looked down at his shoes, and he said, I'm sorry, Nick. He said, I never made an official report, so you won't find it in the files. I mean, his phrase was something like, I didn't want to be known as Flying Saucer Fred for the rest of my Air Force career.
Well, yeah, which is interesting. I don't know, you know, from my own experience, I feel like if I saw something, you know, I feel like I could have reported it. You know, I don't feel like it would have, I don't know, you know, who knows? I can't go back in time when I was there, but I kind of feel like I would hope I would have reported it, but unknown, you know?
Yeah. And I think
Maybe
things
not.
are changing. I mean, of course, I think it was in 2018 or maybe 19, but the US Navy, of course, formally issued guidance to its people, telling them, you know, what to do, how to report. This is now, I doubt there are pilots flying now who haven't, for example, seen those US Navy videos, who don't know that Congress is now taking an interest in this, who don't know that we've had various programs, whether they're AATIP, whether they're the UAP task force, whether it's this new airborne object identification management synchronization group.
I think you said it right, even.
I think I did. It was a challenge. I don't have any notes in front of me, and I thought, am I going to do that without fluffing my lines? You know, but there are very few pilots flying now who don't know all that. So I think the stigma, it's not gone, but it's going. And as I say, all these DOD initiatives and congressional interest and what's coming up in the next defense bill, particularly, are helping enormously.
Yeah, you mentioned flight safety and possibly national security, right? I think you mentioned that as part of your MOD. And it's kind of interesting how you're going to coach it. You know, when you get all this data and you have to pass it up for decisions to your higher ups, you know, you have to pick kind of an angle to coach it as. And yeah, I think they went with flight safety and possibly national security. You know, the flight safety I get for sure, but then possibly national security, it irks me because as a military person, you know, everything's a threat, right? Until you know what it is. And you know, I love this where we're like, they say the same thing. We don't know what it is, but we're sure it's not a threat. I think Obama even said that. There's lights in the sky. We don't know what they are, but there's no threat, you know?
And the crazy thing, as you know, is that threat is defined by the equation, or can be defined by the equation, capability times intent. And from all the data we have, the indicators are that capability is at the high end of the scale. We have no value for intent because to coin Lou Elizondo's phrase, we don't know who's behind the wheel. Therefore, we can't say whether or not there's a threat. And in those circumstances, but particularly when these things are very often in some of the most sensitive parts of airspace and areas where some of the most expensive and highly sensitive US military assets are congregated, doing training, often of new integrated air defense systems, how could you say it's not a potential threat at the very least until, as you say, you can nail down what it is and satisfy yourself that there isn't a threat? It's crazy, but yeah.
It's crazy, right? It's not just me that they say possibly national security.
I could see, because I've been one. I mean, I was a civilian employee. I could see the fingerprints of the bureaucrats all over that ODNI report. And I could see someone saying, could we take out the word threat and replace it with the word challenge? And could we maybe caveat it with possible national security challenge or potential national security challenge? You know, so yeah.
I was very happy from this, though, because there were numbers. You know, these numbers here, you know, right here, 144 reports, you know, 80 reports involving multiple sensors. You know, bureaucrats can't get around that. You know, like, yeah, you can add in a possibly, but someone had to make the decision here that, yeah, we're going to put these numbers in there. I was very happy to see that.
Yeah, and they didn't go back that far. I mean, this was a snapshot, and this didn't include reports from the public, for example. And if you look at the Blue Book stats and the stats from the work that I did, I mean, we of course had our military reports, and they were an important component. But in terms of just sheer numbers, the public reports are most of it. So this snapshot that ODNI did in this preliminary assessment of just 144 reports is the tip of the iceberg, and ignored the fact that this subject of UFOs has a nearly 80-year backstory, which has not yet been addressed by DOD and ODNI. Really?
Yeah, that was the point of this study, right? Was to do, like you mentioned, a generalized. This was your original, from the UK MOD, but it was how many incidents. I was surprised to see. Let's see here. This was a number of UAP annual reports. Like you mentioned, there's quite a bit more. Could be the tip of the iceberg just from what you guys documented in the UK. You know, smaller country and etc.
Yes. You've only got to look at the statistics put out by civilian organizations like the Mutual UFO Network and the National UFO Reporting Center, and then realize that despite these names, there is no single focal point for people to report. And it should tell anyone looking at this that the ODNI report was just looking at a little sample, frankly.
A sample. And so what is your feeling? What do you think will happen with the NDAA? You know, what's your impression of the bill? You think it'll be signed hopefully this year?
Yeah, I think it will be signed, and all the indications are that although Kirsten Gillibrand didn't get everything that she had put into her amendment, which was currently, I think, co-sponsored by Senator Marco Rubio, the main thing that she didn't get was this civilian board.
Yeah,
that groups like the Galileo Project and the Scientific Coalition for Ufology would have been able to nominate for. I mean, federal oversight boards, you know, with civilian membership aren't new, but obviously in the negotiations they did manage to kind of strike that one out. But most of what Gillibrand and Rubio and others wanted is in, and I'm enormously encouraged by the language of the bill, because what it's going to do is several things. Firstly, it's going to lead to much closer liaison between the military and the intelligence community, I mean, that's mandated. Secondly,
yeah,
there is going to be a proper science plan now that's going to have to be sufficiently robust that it holds water, and it's going to need to bring in other parts of government like NASA and things. And my goodness, we've seen some pretty strong statements recently from the NASA administrator. So that's another encouraging point. So going forward, I'm enormously encouraged that Congress, both in the Senate and in the House, and both in the intelligence committees and in the armed services committees, are gripping this in a way that they've never gripped it before, and are really going to, I mean, of course, all the, you know, people are saying like accountability is a new thing. Obviously it's not. It's always been built in. But I think in relation to UFOs, we're going to see this more than we've ever seen it before. Congress is finally saying, look, we don't know what this is, but it's in our airspace. It's coming close to our aircraft carriers, to our destroyers, to our F-18 Super Hornets, to our other parts of our critical national infrastructure over the continental United States. It's often in some of the most sensitive, restricted areas. Congress is now saying, enough. Come on, DOD, ODNI, and others, put your heads together, work on this, and bring us the answer as to what's going on in our airspace.
Yeah, man, that was great. I hope they do. It's so, yeah, it's so. I'm so optimistic for that bill. But we'll see. You know, is it? So you think there's a definite difference between this bill, NDAA, and the project that you worked on, or at least Project Blue Book? I guess we can go back to that. But you think this is definitely like another level above. We may actually get some sort of progress.
I think so. I think this, because Blue Book, you could say, and the smaller program that I was involved with was much more internal. I mean, yes, we were public facing, and we published summaries and things like that, but there wasn't, frankly, much accountability. Congress rarely did a deep dive into Blue Book. The same in the UK. Members of Parliament rarely asked about this question. But now, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's not just necessarily numbers. It's who those people are. And when they're chairing committees and saying, we are going to hold DOD to account on this. So yeah, NDAA 2022 goes way beyond Blue Book, goes way beyond anything I was involved with, because it's twin track. It's not only the military and the intelligence committee, the intelligence community doing the research and investigation, but it's Congress saying, we're going to keep on at you on this, and we're going to keep bringing you back to the committee room to tell us, what you're doing, how it's going, what your conclusions are. And the public will get to see, I mean, at least one of the good things is we won't get all the answers, but the public will at least get an annual summary, unclassified, of course, but we'll get more than we've ever had before. I think that's what people should be encouraged by. But as I say, it's the fact that the military are now looking. Previously, the problem was, sometimes for the reasons of stigma, sometimes for resource reasons, people didn't even look. Now they're looking, and now Congress is saying, we're looking too. That's new. It's exciting. It takes it to a level we've simply not seen before.
Wow, that's great to hear. I was thinking just while you were talking there about flight safety. I was in the military, and I was a flight safety officer, right? I love flight safety. I did a bunch of investigations. I really enjoyed it, investigating, how, if you have a crash, how do you actually determine the cause, the fault, all that. Very, very, very interesting. But what I notice is we can pass up potential for flight safety incidents, right? You can pass up, this will be this is a dangerous action that we're taking part in. We're accepting too much risk for this actions that we're doing, right? And I can pass that up as a flight safety officer. But I don't think anything actually happens until someone dies or something blows up, essentially. And it's almost as if it's not causing these crashes, or we haven't gotten the smoking gun that any crashes have actually happened from these UAPs. So it's just not a problem. It's just not an issue that the military really has to deal with. I don't know. Did you have that same kind of feeling, as you're going through? Were there any fatalities caused by these things, where someone had to go to their house and say, hey, I'm sorry you were killed by a UFO, we can't explain it?
No, the UFO community claims that has happened on multiple cases. I've seen no evidence of it from any UK government files. I have seen plenty of near collisions reported where the pilots and the navigators weren't able to identify the object. In some cases, I'm sure those will be balloons, drones, a number of other things, microlights, things like that, in misperceptions of fireball meteors, even where someone has misjudged height and distance, perhaps. But in some cases, yeah, perhaps these are literal, UAP, whatever that core phenomenon may be. And I take your point. And I just hope, I somewhere in, maybe it's in the preliminary assessment, maybe it was in one of the other pilot reports, but there are reliable data to say that pilots have reported, said, I nearly hit this thing.
Yes. It was 11 in that report.
Yeah. Let's hope that's not how we get a resolution to the mystery. Let's hope we do it before that happens, not because that happens.
Yes, exactly. But it kind of leads me to, they can just ignore it. It makes it much easier. I've just seen so many issues ignored, in the military, just because the nature of the job, right? We're deemed to be expendable, essentially, on some level. So if no one's really dying, they just keep moving, keep firing. They just, keep moving.
You know far better than I, but by a bizarre coincidence, although I was a civilian, I once had a Ministry of Defense job where I had some responsibilities for flight safety, and my job was to take Board of Inquiry reports, which back in the day were paper files, often literally inches thick, and distill those into clear, concise summaries for Parliament, for the Secretary of Defense, that sort of thing. So I actually have some experience of this myself. And yeah, I absolutely take your point. People often preface these reports with the simple kind of phrase, something like fast jet training is inherently dangerous, or there is a degree of risk in low flying. And these were truisms, but it didn't, it was always the difficult thing. The only way to eliminate risk altogether would be not to fly at all. So yes, obviously that's a nonsense. But the question, the whole science of risk management, questions about what your risk appetite are, without wanting to go down a completely unrelated, except it isn't, you could have that debate about COVID. To what extent are individuals at risk of catching it or of getting hospitalized or killed by it, as opposed to, say, society as a whole? And yet people, the New York Times, I know I'm going off track, but it's a wonderful story in a way. The New York Times, who've consistently, shall we say, highlighted the risk, even they said in an article, come on, a kid is at more risk of dying in a car crash on the way to school than of COVID caught at school. But and then there was the classic book Freakonomics, which did that very famous thing where I think they said something like, people think the most dangerous thing in your house for a kid is a gun. It's not, it's the swimming pool. People don't understand what risk is, and then they can't really, even if they do, they can't then quantify it in relation to themselves. I know we've gone off track, but I thought that was interesting.
No, I mean, risk mitigation it's basically what fighter pilots do. You know, the difficult decisions you have to make in a you know, I did mostly training, but the difficult decisions you have to make really come down to risk mitigation. You know, that's why, well, you know, you'll do this action, you know, you suppress an enemy air defense to mitigate the risk and then enter into the defense ring of that missile system or something. So no, you know, flight safety, risk mitigation, these are like two of the main you know, my loves, I guess, or passions in flying career, right? Doesn't sound as sexy, right? You talk about, you know, what a fighter pilots actually, you know, consider themselves with, but the deep thinking is that risk mitigation, you know, how do we mitigate the risk? Is it worth this? You know, can we accept one loss? Can we accept multiple losses? So no, very interesting. But yeah, let's get to a couple of questions.
Sure.
Well, I really liked this one. He basically said, what is, according to you, the weirdest aspect of the whole phenomena?
Oh my goodness. That's a very good and interesting question. I think it probably is this sudden acceleration from a virtual hover to high Mach speeds, because if that is being reported accurately, sometimes not just visually, but on other systems, then it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Not so much a new physics, but certainly a reappraisal of our understanding of the laws of physics. And anything that maybe tells us our world isn't quite the world we thought it was is hugely interesting. And as the second part of my answer to that question would be the sort of, if any of this is true in terms of this being extraterrestrial visitation, then clearly that involves, or must almost certainly involve, some sort of workaround to the apparent barrier of light speed. And maybe, as I say, it's in some of those things that were listed in those studies that DIA notified to Congress, like anti-gravity, warp drives, wormholes, stargates, and things. And that's hugely exciting, because to me, the reason it's exciting is that one day, who knows, that will take humanity to the stars. As you may well know, I don't know if you've ever done an exchange post with an exchange tour with the Royal Air Force, but the RAF motto is per ardua ad astra, through adversity to the stars. And I like to think that perhaps that's where our destiny is. So the most interesting thing that I've come across is the cases where it implies the physics that might one day take humanity to the stars.
Yeah, amazing. And I think there is, at least in my brain, it seems like there's a relationship between, you know, that hypersonic travel or those accelerations and no sound. You know, to me, it almost feels like it behaves as a light. You know how electromagnetic radiation, it can be a particle or a wave.
Yes.
It's almost like, if it's true and all this, they're able to turn into a wave instead of a particle, you know, where we're just, all we can do is you know, work in the particle realm where we actually have physical things. Somehow they are able to, or at least the phenomena appears like, if it's no sound from sonic booms, to me, it's lack of momentum, you know, or they can do those quick movements. Like, it's almost just like a wave, like it is light in some ways. I don't know. Just an interesting thought mentioned on your case.
And funny, when you did that motion, it reminded me, I think one of the famous people to have seen a UFO was Muhammad Ali. And his quote, I think, from memory, was something like, "I've seen them playing tag between the stars. And that was fascinating. But yeah, I mean, it is, I mean, we're getting into some spooky Schrodinger's cat wave particle duality here.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, like you mentioned, it pushes physics further, even, and that's why I'm so interested in this phenomena, is even if it's not aliens, right? There's obviously a very good chance it isn't. It's still amazing. Like, you know, how are we seeing this? How can this guy that you talk to see this craft? You know, you trust him, at least you believe that he believes it. You know, how is that possible? It just blows my mind. Even if it is terrestrial, like you mentioned, terrestrial craft or something like that, it's still phenomenal.
It's interesting, whatever it is. And if it is terrestrial, and if it's an adversary, my goodness, we need to know about it.
Exactly. That would be the possibly national security. Yeah, not sure. But get to what? Let's see. A couple more questions here. Does the MOD deny you work for them? This is from a patron.
No.
If so, why? I guess.
No. I mean, you know, I see all sorts of nonsense written about me on the internet. Some people who say that I was just doing admin there. Some people who say that I'm still secretly working for them in some sort of disinformation role. I mean, fortunately, the files from my time there, most of them have now been declassified and released, and they're available at the National Archives with my name somewhat all over them, sometimes redacted through data protection, but slipped through the net often enough. But I mean, more than that, there's a member of parliament some years ago, hearing about the work that I'd done, asked a formal question to the Secretary of State for Defense in Parliament and said, you know, to ask Her Majesty's government what Mr. Nick Pope did from 1991 to 1994. And the answer is written into and on the website, the official UK Parliament website, and it said, yeah, his duties included investigating UFOs. So it's there. I think one of the reasons that the confusion arises is it has been MOD policy, as indeed it was DOD policy for years, to downplay the scope of our work in all this. Sometimes to the rather comedic extent that we had to downplay the scope of our own jobs. But as I say, fortunately, the truth is out there on the website of UK Parliament.
Yes. Fortunately. What about any incidents over or under the ocean? You know, were you guys investigating any USOs under the water?
I'm aware of such reports, but for the most part, our program was heavily configured, as was Blue Book, on the Air Force. I think, knowing what we now know about how the US Navy seems to be in the front line of this, that was a mistake. I think we missed a trick by being so Air Force centric that we didn't really do a deep dive into surface ships and submarines, if you'll excuse the pun.
What about nukes? What about the nuclear angle? Do you remember any?
Yeah, I'm aware. I'm aware that it's been reported, but as the ODNI report says, it may be a statistical anomaly. It does look like reports cluster around these sorts of facilities, but that might simply be because they are more heavily surveilled in the first place. So it's a kind of, we're not quite sure on that one. Still aren't.
Okay. I get, this is a good question. Is the English government in possession of exotic material, or has there been crash retrievals?
To the best of my knowledge, no. That's not to say that over the years, people in the UFO community haven't acquired and sent in something. Oh, a rancher had a sighting. The following day, I went out to the field. We found this strange metal. Do you think this could be a thing? Both in the US and in the UK, that sort of thing has happened. But in the UK, no, it's not like we have crashed saucers in Air Force hangars or anything like that. Yeah. Just just from time to time, people send stuff in. And none of that stuff, by the way, when we looked at it using techniques like X-ray diffraction and isotopic ratio analysis, none of those things made us go, wow, maybe that was made in Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, there was an interesting one. Nichols, I think was the name. He's a Stanford physicist. He just released an isotopic. Basically, they saw a higher isotopic count, essentially, of a document. Let's see. Britain is the land of crop circles. You know, what is your? I really want to get into crop circles. It seems very interesting to me. I keep saying that, and I just haven't done it. What is your take on crop circles?
Well, I'm afraid I'm completely skeptical.
Yes, you are. Okay.
We did look at them just because it was alleged that there was a link with the UFO phenomenon. People at the outset literally thought that disc-shaped craft were landing in fields and either flattening the crop with the craft or with the downwash, something like that. I looked at it. We couldn't put much resources into it, but I never saw anything that made me say anything other than hoax. I think people have this image of these two old boys who confessed to doing it with planks of wood and ropes, not realizing that sometimes it was a little bit more sophisticated than that. There were teams of aeronautical engineering students and such like going out and pranking the local community with taking out night vision goggles, GPS, kind of teams of people and ranchers who were looking the other way because over the course of a weekend, they could then get a couple of people to stand at the entrance to the field and charge $10 or whatever it was to get in and have a look. So people said, oh, the farmers, the ranchers would never be complicit in that because of the damage to the crop. They could make hundreds, if not thousands, with all these enthusiasts coming in over the course of a long weekend just to say, I've been to a crop circle.
Yeah, I guess it's almost like we should have so many cameras now. At least we would have, I don't know. Seems like you could see a crop circle being formed at some point if we have enough cameras out there. I mean, but I don't know. I'm very interested in it. I'll still check it out. This is from another patron, Paul Oberlin. It says, I'd like to know the source of your claims about Roswell. For instance, how is it that you know about the prime ministers you know this, but prime ministers of the UK and presidents don't? I don't know your claims about Roswell.
Well, I'm not sure I've made claims about Roswell.
Yeah, I don't either.
My position on Roswell is that we know something happened, or we can be reasonably sure something happened because it was the 509th bomb group that caused the initial press release to be put out saying we have recovered one of these flying discs. But I don't know what crashed, so I'm not sure that I really have a claim about it. I do a lot of TV shows about it. I sometimes tell the story. I sometimes appear as a sort of on-screen narrator with some of this, but I don't really have a position on Roswell.
Yeah, but you believe, or I guess like you just said, you think something happened based on that.
I think something crashed, but whether it was alien spacecraft, secret aircraft, weather balloon carrying high altitude test equipment to monitor Soviet nuclear explosions, or I don't know.
Yeah, from Jesse Marcel. Again, I'm researching all this just over the past several months, or a few months actually. But Jesse Marcel, just seems like an amazing interview. When you watch him talk about that, the material, how thin it is, hit it with a sledgehammer. It seems very compelling. This one's about the Calvine Incident. Trevor Mays asks, how can the British government get away with reclassifying the photos from the Calvine Incident for another 50 years? Shouldn't people be taking to the streets to demand it?
Well, this is a fascinating case from August 1990. Two people in Scotland took a series of 6 photos of daylight photos of a large sort of battleship gray diamond-shaped craft that was hovering and then sort of accelerated away, but vertically, like I guess a Harrier, but doing its vertical takeoff. But again, orders of magnitude beyond that. And to cut a long story short, the photos subsequently disappeared. I think there's been a misunderstanding about what's been reclassified. The original file has been reclassified. The reason it's been reclassified is because it contains the names of witnesses, the names of MOD investigators, the names of intelligence community imagery analysts who looked at all of this. And so that has been redacted and won't be released till about, I don't know, from memory, 2072 or 2076, something like that. But the MOD's position is that you won't, even then, they won't open up the file and out will pop the photos. The MOD's position is that they no longer hold the photos.
I see. So you would have been at the UFO desk just a few months after that, I guess. After that.
Yes, my predecessor did the investigation on that, but we had an enlarged poster-sized blow-up of the best of these 6 photos on our office wall. And occasionally, when I went to talk to Defense Intelligence, they would pull the photos out of a briefing pack just to make a point. And so there were a lot of them kicking around, but then the Freedom of Information Act came in, and a lot of them suddenly disappeared. And the best image that we have now, frankly, is a recreation that I did from memory because it was on my office wall for years. I teamed up with a graphic artist in LA, and we used we had a kind of small, blurry, black and white photocopy image from one of the declassified MOD files. So from that and from my memory, we did a reconstruction. I have to say, I put it on Facebook a while ago, and an MOD colleague, in fact, 2, one who worked in that office and one who was in the same division, but who sometimes swung by, said, "Oh, you nailed it. That's it." So it's not the real thing, but the image that most people use now when the media run stories on that is near as damn it how it looked.
So we'll just run through these next ones. What's the one aspect of this you find the most unsettling?
The idea that somebody is operating technology that the United States, as the world's preeminent superpower, says, or certainly the implication is that it goes above and beyond what we have in our inventory.
Yes. What about, for me, it's abductions. I don't know. What's your take on abductions? Just
I'm undecided on that. I mean, they're interesting stories, and witness testimony still lies at the heart of our criminal justice system, but we're not as lucky with that as we are with the other aspects of the phenomena, where we have radar and we have FLIR and we have other sensor platforms.
Yeah, it's like single witness kind of scenario, Yeah, difficult. What area of science do you think will prove key to understanding the technology?
Aeronautical engineering, I always think. I mean, and that's always the challenge. You can have all the theoretical physics in the world, but the aeronautical engineer will say it's useless if you can't build something.
Yes, the engineering, the physicist, I think. It seems like the physicist.
How does it fly?
Yes. How does it work with no sound? How does it move that fast? Which state, company, individual do you think has the best understanding of the phenomena, and why? I'm
going to give a trick answer to this question, yes, but probably a true answer. Somebody whose name we have yet to hear. There's probably someone sitting somewhere in the, I would guess, military intelligence who has a better handle on this than anyone. And that person has not yet spoken out, maybe never will.
Yeah, excellent. And then final question for me is, I'm, again, still new to this field. I thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time to talk today. I know you're busy, obviously, you're famous. So I'd guess like to ask is, where do you think I should focus on? I live in Portugal, so I could go to the UK, etc. What do you think is the key case? Is it Rendlesham, or what should I focus on? What would you
Rendlesham's interesting. Calvine is interesting. Cash Landrum's interesting. The Nimitz interesting.
Yeah.
But I would say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't bet the farm on a single case, because if that case then falls, as some cases inevitably do as new data emerge, then it's a problem. So I would say focus on types of cases. So maybe pilot sightings or radar visual, to speak to something that would also play to your own areas of expertise and contacts that you'll doubtless still have in the community. So I think I would say focus on categories rather than individual cases, and watch obviously events with the defense bill and what happens there. But also I would, as a final thing, I would say this: if the history of this topic has taught us anything, it's expect the unexpected. Expect something to come suddenly and unexpectedly from left field as a disruptor. And yeah, that's very often, I mean, the whole New York Times story about AATIP and the Navy videos came in December 2017, really as a bolt from the blue, and turned this subject on its head. Expect more developments as that story continues to unfold, but expect new things too, the unknown unknowns.
Oh, well, excellent. And so how do we follow you? How do watchers of this follow you? What do you recommend? Your book on Rendlesham seems amazing. I'm going to read that. I have a book list, but any other way, where can we find you? How do we follow you?
My website is nickpope.net. That has some basic information about my government work, my books, and there is an email contact on there which comes direct to me personally. And on Twitter, which I tend to use for most of my sort of short notice announcements and things, it's at Nick Pope MOD. Not an official account, not an official MOD account, of course, but just sort of a handle I chose because it, I guess, reflects who I am.
Yeah, excellent. So I'll have those links in the description for anyone that wants to check out Nick Pope's work. Thank you so much, sir, for being here today. And yeah, it is inspiring. I'm happy to hear you're so optimistic on the NDAA after so many years, because I get disheartened, because I look and we have much of this same information like 50, 70 years ago. We had radar contacts. We had multiple witnesses seeing it. We had fighter pilots, eyewitness testimony. So I am inspired to hear that you're optimistic on this. That is good news.
Mean, there's always the possibility of disappointment, but going forward into 2022, I'm optimistic, and this subject does tend to recycle, and it does come in peaks and troughs. That's absolutely true. But I'm as optimistic as I've ever been. Interesting times with more to come, I think.
Yeah, excellent, sir. Well, thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
Fantastic interview. I learned so much in that. Really, thinking back on it is just the interviews with the military personnel. When Nick's interviewed so many people, I wonder how many hundreds he's interviewed who saw these black triangles or some sort of UFO phenomena, some craft that they saw. That was very interesting to me, that he believes that they saw these craft. He believes that these craft are out there flying around and doing all these crazy maneuvers that we can't explain. So, and like he mentions, it's either a terrestrial organization or group of people that are flying these craft around, or it is some other force, some other life form that we haven't come across. So that was pretty interesting to me. I wasn't necessarily expecting that from Nick Pope. So happy to see that. And really, he was very optimistic on the Defense Act, the 2022 Defense Act. Really feels like at least to him, who's been in the field for over 30 years, is that something's changing. And that is very exciting, actually. That's very exciting, because the more I look into this field, you go back 80 years, there's so much information. So it is kind of disheartening. I was happy to hear that from Nick Pope. So thanks for watching all the way to the end. It really does help. It's watch time is the most important component of YouTube. And like and subscribe. If you like this content, this longer form interview content, go ahead and like and subscribe. I try and read all the comments. I'll take a couple weeks off for Christmas. I'll still put out some content probably, but just taking a break. Wish everybody happy holidays. And we'll see you in the next year. It's gonna be exciting, 2022. See you guys, peace.